Welcome to the Home Care Strategy Lab. I'm your host, Miriam Allred. It's great to be back with everyone this week. Today in the lab, I'm joined by Neal Kursban, the CEO of Family and Nursing Care in Maryland. Neal, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to being here today.
It's been a while since I've interviewed you formally, but I have followed your journey, and I think it was at HCAOA this past fall that someone said, "Why haven't you had Neal on the show?" Maybe it was your brother or cousin or someone in the business, but people have told me to interview you again, so better late than never. Here we are.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's start with your origin story. Tell everyone about Family and Nursing Care and your kind of the founder story, and then when you joined the family business, and then give us some details on kind of the profile, size, shape, payers, geography of the business so we can have that context going into the conversation.
All right, sounds great. So Sandy Kursban, she's my mother. She founded the company in 1968. And what's neat is there wasn't really much of an industry. So often she's referred to as a pioneer in home care because back in the day, people would stay in the hospital for weeks or months even before going home and didn't really have a need as much for home care back as much. So 1968, she founded it, and her goal was, I want to service our elderly population, charging them as little as possible, and I want the workers, the caregivers we call them today, of course, to earn as much as possible. So her advisor back then, and I've asked her many times, was it your accountant or was your lawyer? And she doesn't remember, but her advisor said, well, good luck staying in business. And back then, by the way, it was very uncommon for a woman to own a company. And I got some funny stories I could share about that. Anyhow, and so they said, good luck. And what the recommendation was by this advisor was to have the workers be called, what they called it, contractors. And Sandy, my mother, said, well, what's that? And they said, don't worry about it. So little did I know, or we know, decades, 57 years ago, that the term independent contractor is prevalent in today's, here we are today. And so part of our business is run with, the term often is called a nurse registry. And then we also, in my years, added the employee, the agency model down later. So that's this part of the Sandy story. And then I joined the company 1995. It was late 1995, so I'll be hitting my 30-year anniversary later this year, which is remarkable to think of that. This is what I'm doing for 30 years. And so, my journey was the first several years, again, I was in my 20s, and I wasn't quite as mature as I am today. So I'm not sure if I was ready to be in management position. So it turned out to be very fortunate that I had the benefit of having done all the positions in the company. And so my title for many years was basically office floater, informally. And I remember I had the desk that I wasn't even in there that much because I would come into the office, and if someone was sick or on vacation or on maternity leave or whatever it may be, my job was their job. And if everyone was there, I had projects that, projects stacked on my desk of things to do. So I was a coordinator, and I interviewed caregivers, and I did orientations, and I did accounting and interviewed office employee, HR, basically every aspect of the company for many, many years. Did on call, which was lots of fun. So having the benefit of having lived it and then grown to where we are today, it's a neat story.
Let me make sure I've got a couple things right. When you joined, it was 100% registry model. Yes. And you helped introduce kind of the home care side, correct?
That is correct.
And the business was how big, how many clients, what revenue size were you when you joined in the 90s?
It was a lot smaller. So I was office employee number 12 or 13, and today we have about 100. So we've grown substantially since those days. Granted, the rates were lower, so the revenue was much lower, and of course, with inflation, rates are higher. So it's probably like $4 or $5 million in revenue then, and now we're up closer to $65 million a year in revenue.
Okay. And what about payers? What's kind of what was the payer mix, and what does the payer mix look like today?
So the payer mix was people that would pay privately, so not Medicaid, not Medicare, not family Medicaid, not basically out of their own pocketbook, their own checkbook, and would pay for the service. And even when I came and joined, and things have not changed. So even the agency employee model that I introduced later in my time also kept that same very narrow lane of private pay. So it's just private pay.
Okay, even to today. And also make sure I have this right. Today, the registry home care split is about 50-50.
It is. So again, it had a 2007. So it's been 18 years of us running the agency. And I guess the other close to 40 years plus the last 18 years of running the registry. So yes, the agency has definitely caught up. The model has caught up, and we could have a whole other session on the pros and cons of both, and having run both and lived both, and still today living both models. There's certainly pros and cons, but yeah, as I sit here and speak to you today in 2025, they are now about equal size.
And we're not going to go too far down this path, but in short, like, what is your philosophy around that? Today it's 50-50 split. In Neal's ideal world, would you like it to be all home care, all registry, keep the mix? Like, in short, what does ideal look like for the business?
I don't have a vision on that. I'm very much, what does the client, family, what does the customer want? And we find that and we're very open about, here's the two models and which is your preference. So we get into, without confusing them too much, we do explain that we have two models. And at the end of the day, just for simplicity purposes, I would, just to keep it simple, it's about $5 less per hour if you're a client that gets care on the registry side. And the caregivers actually make more money per hour, but there's other things that they're not getting. But their hourly amount tends to be a little bit higher than what the employees make on the agency side. So, wait a minute, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so it's all about the clients. You
Yeah.
don't feel strongly about it being more home care heavy or more registry heavy. It's what your market needs, and you're able to deliver.
Right, it's what yes. And that also holds on the caregiver side as well. So some caregivers prefer the independent contractor status, and others prefer an employee status. And again, I don't have a dog in the fight. It's just whatever the client and caregiver feel is best for them.
Well, we're not going to go too far down this registry side, even though we could, because I think that's really interesting. Today, what I want us to focus on are really like your three differentiators. Like you mentioned, your mom, Sandy, is a pioneer in home care. Not very many home care companies can say they've been doing this for 50 plus years, but you are one of the few that can. And so there's kind of three differentiators that you've helped me identify that you believe set family and nursing care apart. The first being service obsession, the white glove experience that you're delivering to these clients. The second is caregiver sustainability. We're going to talk about how you're paying these caregivers so much and some of the foundations and programs that you've built to keep caregivers for years and years and years. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is being a family owned and operated business for this long. You've been approached by PE, you've got a lot of outside interest and money coming your way, but you've decided to keep the business independently owned and operated. And so we're going to talk about that as a differentiator as well. So just wanted to kind of preview the three areas we're going to talk about. Let's start with the service obsession. You explained to me that you want your business to deliver an experience compared to maybe like the Ritz-Carlton, like the top tier experience that these clients can have in home care. And so the question I want to ask, every home care business says that I offer premium care, quality care, like we're the best in our market, but you truly have built that. And I want to know, what does that look like in practice? How are you and the team delivering that experience over and over and over?
Okay, it's a loaded set of questions you asked, but I'll often say we're not in the home care business, we're in the service business. Because again, private pay, families, clients paying $35, $40 an hour, whatever the going rate is in their respective market. And if you do the math very quickly, just let's keep the number simple, $40 an hour, 4 hours a day, 4 times, it's $160, times that by 5 or 7 days. Like, the math adds up very quickly. It's not like when you get your cable bill or your phone bill and it's 100, 200, whatever. This is a lot of money. And if people are willing and able to spend this kind of money I myself would expect that in return. I would expect to have a service experience that's going to wow me. And so that's our job at Family Nursing Care. So that's a little bit buzzwordy, so we'll get into the specifics, but it's a philosophy. And I do got to go a step further, and this is a bit into the weeds, but so every week we have an all hands huddle meeting with all 100 of our employees. It's 15 minutes. And every week we go through one of our guiding values. So we have we have a mission and then 15 guiding values. And we go through each and every one of them. We go through one of them that week, and then we give an example. An employee will give an example of how they lived it that particular week. And so it's just a constant reminder, a lot of times, and we used to have this on the wall. Here's our guiding values, and this is what we all are supposed to know. But we live it every week, and we remind people, and then 16 the mission plus 15 guiding values every 16 weeks, we start all over again. So anyhow, it's constant. It's just constantly dripping in who we are, how we do, what we do, when we do, what we do.
Yeah, explain the team structure, assessments, on call. What does that experience for the client look like?
So we are a company that is begging for client feedback. So in my view, the only way you can improve is to know where you're falling short. And so years ago, it was anecdotally, we thought we had a good idea, but this goes back at least 10 years. We found a survey company that is really able to get specific with the questions on all parts of the operations of our company. From the time they call, or each time they call, how long did the phone ring? How many seconds? We literally have between that, how long did it take to transfer your call? So every aspect from the initial intake to the times they're already a client and their accessibility to get a hold of somebody, to get a hold of somebody live, because we have a very strong philosophy that people don't want to call and have to leave a voicemail. And so what's our infrastructure built in a way to prevent that from happening, even if it's not primary person they're used to speaking to, but how do they get... So we have this company that really identifies where we're strong and where our clients tell us where we're strong and where we're not. And so, for example, the last couple years, we've seen our score not be as high as we'd like, and it's benchmarked across the industry, and it's not as high as we'd like on the nights and weekends, or on call, what people call on call. And so we've seen this now for a couple years. We've tried this internally, we've tried that internally. We hadn't quite cracked the code. And only through a lot of trial and error and consistent feedback that what we were doing still wasn't making a noticeable difference. So it kind of brought us back to the drawing board. What do we got to do now? What do we got to do now? It's not what do we think, how they're reacting. It's what are they telling us. So and our operation plan really is based on what our clients are telling us.
Is this survey company you can name names. Is this a company we've heard of, or is this something local to Maryland?
It's not one that, I think there's one that commonly used in this industry, but we don't use that. I mean, it's called NBRI. Okay. They're in Texas. N as in Neal, B as in Barbara, R as in Richard, I as in Igloo. NBRI. Okay. And so, they do benchmarking and it's really worked for us because, again, you can cater your particular questions that you think are important to your company, and they do have, they can benchmark that against others in the industry. So it's been great.
And you mentioned managing just the call volume. A business of your size, there's a lot of call volume.
Yes.
Do you have a dedicated team that just answers the phone? How big is that team? How is that structured? How do you manage just the pure call volume?
We do that to the clients. We also do this with the caregivers. We ask the caregivers for constant feedback, and they are not shy, thank goodness, and they can choose to go anonymous or they can put their name, and most of them actually put their name behind it. I like that. And the client's the same thing. You can do it anonymously or tell us. And also the staff. I do it for my office staff. I want to know, how do you feel about where we can improve, and what are we doing, what's working, why are you still here? Why do we have such low turnover? So anyway, feedback. Going to your question. So if you were to walk into our office, you would see 3 people whose full-time job is to say, Family Nursing Care, how may I help you? Because the volume is so high that they're just constantly, the volume, and there's some admin responsibilities they have and things along those lines. But yeah, it's all day, every day. There's 3 people saying, hi, how can I help you?
And let's talk about another key component is the like the clinical side of things, sending a nurse out to do the assessment, to do the reassessment, the care planning. What does your process look like there? Do you have how many nurses on staff? Is there any kind of like secret sauce to your approach when it comes to the assessment and the care planning that maybe is an elevated level?
Well, just to be clear, the assessment only takes place on the agency employee side. Just there's legalities behind my answer in there. So half of our business, yes, has registered nurses. And I know not all states across the country require to have an RN to do an initial assessment or plan of care. In Maryland, yes. In DC, yes. Other states, yes. Others, no. So, okay. So we're not set up where the person that goes out, this is probably a little different than most, but we don't have someone get into the dining room to then get the case to go active. We do all that. We do the majority of that. I'd say 90+% of that is done prior to anybody going into the house, whether it's our nurse or a caregiver. Like we handle all the intake activity over the phone. The nurses are not there to close the case to get it to go active. But the key with, there's an expression, I guess, you can kiss a lot of frogs before you find the prince. I would say in our world we've had to kiss a lot of nurses to find the nurses that we have today. Let's just say the nurses we have today are philosophically aligned with getting to yes. To getting a care, they recognize that the most important thing and the reason why we're in business is for that older adult to have a caregiver in their house. And I know it might sound strange I'm saying this, but some of the previous nurses sometimes would make that more complicated than what it needed to be.
Okay, this is pretty interesting that maybe 80 to 90% of the intake assessment, getting a case started, actually happens over the phone and virtually rather than in the home.
More than 90%.
More than 90%. Okay,
Closer
this is
to 100, to be honest, like at least probably closer to 95.
And there's kind of two components here, like the office staff and their preference, and then also the client. If they don't feel the need to have someone come out in person and see them and assess the home and do that, it sounds like that's kind of just your methodology for doing things, and it seems to be working well.
Well, I would love to say it was genius, but again, on the registry model, there's constraints. And so being born, and that's how the company was founded, that's all it was allowed to do. But then it seemed to work also on the agency side. It's the kind of people that do our initial intakes are trained, I guess. I don't know the other word. It's just this is the way that they're set up to be trained to make sure you spend, whether it's 20 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes or 45, like whatever it is that's needed to give that caller the experience that's going to be like, wow, it doesn't matter if someone comes to my home or not, or I don't even need to call another company. You guys, I can feel the warmth. I can feel that I'm going to be taken care of. And then, oh, by the way, a nurse is going to come and do an assessment is almost sort of the message.
And pretty interesting. You have about 100 office employees. Most of them are working fully remote. You know, post-pandemic, they didn't really come back to the office, so they're fully remote. So I'm assuming all of these nurses that you're referring to, they don't spend a lot of time in the office. They're out in their homes and conducting all of these phone calls, these intakes remotely.
Yes. I mean, although part of the service obsession is making sure people are technologically capable to do their job as efficiently as possible. So I've had to hundreds of thousands, actually I'm going to go higher than that. Well, millions may be an exaggeration, but somewhere between hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars on giving people the tools they need to be successful where they are. Whether it's in their home, having 2 or 3 monitors, whether they're having a portable printer, having just the technology, the phones. Like we pay a tremendous amount of money to give people the tools they need to be as efficiently as they need to be where they need to be.
Can you be a little bit more specific there? Like monitors, phones, any other like technology products that you have found that have been particularly helpful with having this huge remote office staff?
Desk right now, and there is not a phone on my desk. And if you go to every single desk in this office, there's not a phone. So we actually don't have a traditional like phone. So everything is done in our company. Everything is done through Teams. So Teams answers our calls. Teams is how we communicate internally. Some people use Slack, but so that is our phone system, and it's also our internal way of communicating.
Okay, which is the Microsoft suite, if anyone doesn't know, the Microsoft Teams. And it sounds like it's internal and external, so it's all baked in one. You're not using a separate external system.
Well, if we're making an outgoing call, it's on Teams. Is that what? Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, like it's one thing to like use it as like a messaging tool internally, but it's another thing to use it for like outbound
Right.
calls or incoming calls
Use
from
it for
prospective
both.
clients. Okay.
For both.
Which is nice to have it all centralized in one system.
Right.
That's probably the beauty of it. What about you're talking about like surveying these clients ongoing? What's the cadence for reaching out to these clients? How often are you reaching out to a single client?
So again, it doesn't come from us. It comes from this NBRI, the third party company. It's done via email and it's a month after care starts, and then it's annual from the month of when they originally started. So if they're with us for 3 years, then every year on the month that they started. So we get we call it the new client survey feedback, and then we have the annual or ongoing client feedback. And then there's ways to parse the information where you can compare and contrast, and you can merge them together and take them apart, and you look geographically. So it's really their software is quite sophisticated also. So it's been really helpful to isolate, well, this particular area of this zip code is what's going on over there. And then it's really helpful for us to know where we're performing incredibly well or if we're underperforming.
And it's sent to the client via email and they respond via email as well?
It's sent to we call them the follow-up one, or the primary contact of the family. So whether it's the client themselves, their spouse, their adult child, or whoever. So it's sent to them via email, and they are responding. And so I think it's sent like every 2 or 3 days, and I think after a third or fourth time. So our response rate it's still actually over 20%, which apparently is pretty decent. I wish it was higher, but they say it's statistically relevant to give you the data that you need to make business decisions, basically.
Okay. So apart from the survey, obviously the caregiver is out there visiting the client, like that's the primary FaceTime. Apart from the survey and apart from the caregiver, are there any other unique touch points from the office, from the nurse, from any other parties to the client other than the caregiver and these surveys?
Well, in addition, we have registered nurses, and we have client service managers, and we have people that do intake that will own a smaller percentage of time. So, okay, there could be several different people that are visiting a client home, but the most common is either the registered nurses on our agency side and or our client service managers. So every day there's every day a client service manager is doing multiple visits. And again, we have a lot of them, but so then we have client service manager associates who handle their caseload while that person's spending Tuesdays visiting 8, 10, 12 clients. But it's more of a retention tool than anything else. It's really just getting to know the client and the family better, and also helps, there's that tricky little step when you get into their door, and just being in the house. I mean, all the benefits of the parking was a little tricky, and you got to go to the back and park. So there's just different things, the benefits that come from going to the house. So yes, the nurses, the client service managers, sometimes our business development, sales, marketer type people will go, and other times the person who does the intake, actually the 5% will actually go to the house because the family demands it. Mm-hmm. And again, that's what the customer wants. In addition to the hour we spent on the phone, if it makes you comfortable, I'm happy to go to your dining room. We can talk about the rest of this.
The reason I ask about just other touch points is back to the kind of Ritz-Carlton analogy. It's like you think of like white glove experiences. There's a lot of touch points, like almost to the point where it's excessive. When you're checking into a hotel, it's like there's texts and there's emails and there's more texts and there's a phone call to confirm parking, and there's just like so many touch points. And so that's why I'm like drilling in a little bit here of like how many touch points do you have?
Oh.
But also the thing that we're about to talk about is like the caregiver. Like the caregiver is like the point person that knows them so well, that shows up at their house every day, that like is also giving them that white glove level of care. And so I'm not fishing that there needs to be, or implying that there needs to be more touch points. I was just curious of like the other touch points that exist.
Because I'm also the adult son-in-law of my father-in-law is getting care. And so it's been interesting from family nursing care on the agency side. So it's been interesting because I remember initially, like the overwhelmed feeling that a family often goes through if they're starting care with urgency. It's one thing if you're thinking about it and let's get some help, and then whether you start this week or that week doesn't really matter. Those are, I'll say, easy, but at least 50% or more of our clients need care within a day or two of when they call. And they're going through a lot. And they don't even know between the hospital discharge plan or the rehab discharge plan or maybe the Medicare home health agency that's going to be sending a nurse, and then we're going to be sending an aide. They're drinking water from a fire hose and often haven't even had home care before. So we are very strategic about the timing of our touch points to the family, email, calling, texting. Like, we have a lot of internal discussions, and you can't even develop an SOP because each one is so, you get themes, but there's a way to not overwhelm people, but you also have to get communication across. And that they're often feeling overwhelmed. So, and I lived it myself, so I can certainly relate. So the whole new case or new client experience, I think that often is going to, when we get to the caregiver, of course, the caregiver that goes in is going to ultimately make or break this long-term success. But a lot of companies kind of screw up even before the caregiver shows up, and that's not good. That's not good.
And you even mentioned a few minutes ago that you burned through a lot of employees that weren't the right fit to handle those intake calls. Like, there's a certain person that needs to be in that seat that can do this extraordinarily well over the phone. And it sounds like you have, over 30 years, worked through a lot of people, and now you've maybe found those kind of diamonds in the rough that are really good at that process.
And again, yes, and we are fortunate that we have very low turnover at this company. The last 2 years we had 3% and 4% turnover in our office. I guess that's good. It's good. Obviously, people wouldn't stay if they were unhappy, but But it's also, you learn, you understand, you go deeper. Every employee, they have institutional knowledge. The longer people are at your company, assuming they're not resistant to change, and we can talk about that in a moment, they have to be willing to change also. But assuming they're also willing to change and go with whatever the new way of doing things is, people are very committed and they're very passionate. And I'm sure everyone says, "Oh, you wouldn't believe my Susie's, she's compassionate too," or very passionate also. But it's hard to get a high percentage of the 100 people. I would say a very high percentage of our staff is very, very engaged. And I know it might sound nice for me as a CEO to say that, but it's reflected in what the clients are telling us, what the caregivers are telling us, what our referral partners are telling us, and what they're telling us, what they tell me, what they do when they put in a survey, and they're very willing to speak out about that. I want to touch back on one thing you mentioned before, and it's actually a really important part of our ability to work remotely, is we do have recorded lines. And so we have the ability to listen in and use, it's a company safe for training and quality purposes. And what we had for a period of time, but it wasn't working consistently, is the AI would tell us when the word frustrated or amazed or rate or cost or expensive, whatever the words that you want to manage, it could say on this 18-minute conversation, go to minute 10 minutes, 13 seconds, and then you can hear what. So it would tell us where to go to save our managers time of having to go. Unfortunately, we've had some R&D issues, and so we've had to temporarily take that off. But we still have the lines that are recorded, and so when you have he said, she said conversations, you can pull it up and listen and hear what was said and what wasn't said, and use it either for an example of what to do well or what can be a training opportunity.
I'm glad you brought that up, and we've all been on the receiving end of hearing that line. This is being recorded for training purposes. How often is someone actually reviewing those calls?
Yes, that was my skepticism. I'm like, come on, people are going to have time to do this. But the reality is it's baked into every director's, for lack of a better word, their job description. And it's important, especially if people are remote, it's hard to know, it's hard to know what you don't know. And then also I would say more often though, it's used literally for examples of when newer people are hired or even existing employees. And it's like, look, here's how the delicacy of this conversation was handled. So it's not intended to be a reprimanding tool, but it is really helpful to help make us that much better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I myself have used software like that. You are a company of size and have some dollars behind you. There's a company called Gong. That's a tech platform that you should look into that does exceptionally well at this, because you're right. A single call and then 1,000 calls. Like there's so much rich information in
Right.
there, but it's so hard to prioritize sifting through
Right.
hundreds and thousands of calls. But if there's, really smart technology that can pinpoint all the keywords, that can bookmark and highlight
Yeah.
things and
Called
show the trends.
GONG.
GONG.
Okay.
Yep.
No, thank you.
I would recommend looking into
Do you
it
know if
as
it
a
interfaces with Teams? Well, anyway, we can talk about that.
That's a good question. I'll let you know. We can sidebar on that
All right.
after. But I agree. Just capturing that information and then using it for training purposes and having the directors review that, like there's just a lot of value in
Right.
that. And again, comes back to this like white glove experience. Like that information matters, every call matters, and in order to improve over time, you have to know what's taking place in those conversations.
But I know it's not intending to be the style of leadership at this company is really lead with a carrot, not with a stick. So it's not looking for gotcha moments. It really is looking either for an opportunity of where or how it could have been improved, either slightly improved or massively improved. But usually it's just even tweaking what was shared and how it was shared. But usually anyway, I've already said this. It's exemplifying what we do well and then using that to kind of be the case study.
Exactly. Finding all of the good things, likely there's so many good things, so many good phrases, so much good dialogue, and you can extract that and use that in your marketing efforts as well. It's not all reprimand, it's not all what you could do better, but more so, here's what's going really well, and here's how we can use that to our advantage.
Yep.
Let's transition into talking about your caregivers. At the start, you mentioned that even Sandy's early philosophy was charge as little as possible, but pay the caregivers as much as possible. Are you currently paying maybe the highest in your market, or where do you compare just on that pay scale?
As far as I know, the average wage that we're paying, which is close to $22 an hour on the agency side, and it's 24 and change on the registry side. That's what it averages. The market's typically in the mid-20s. So it is a choice to pay the caregivers more money. It's a philosophical view on my part. Just think it'd be hard to live on 18 or 19 or $20 an hour, and even think it's hard to live on 22 or 24, but it makes it a little bit easier. So I want to do that.
And when it comes to margins, what is a healthy margin for you on the home care side and on the registry side? And are you always achieving that, or are you paying a lot of overtime so margins aren't as a big a priority? Like, talk to me about your thoughts on margins.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there's different margins. There's what's the rate to the client and what are you paying the caregiver? That's one margin. Then there's the rate you're charging the clients minus the caregiver pay minus everything else, and that's your bottom line margin. I am well aware that our margin of what we're charging the client at 35-ish and paying the caregiver 20, no, it's below 35. I mean, the average of the existing clients, it's 34-ish, and then the caregiver's making 22 on the agency side. That's a much smaller margin than what most companies are willing or able to absorb. And then, of course, my staff is well paid, and we have very rich benefits. So I have made a conscious choice as the owner, I'm 100% owner of the company, to, I guess, make less money. Doesn't mean I'm destitute, but I have made a life choice to not make as much money as I could, I guess, because it feeds me in a different way to be able to take care of a lot of different lives that I know I'm impacting.
Which makes me curious, which numbers are you focused on? Like if you're focused on impact and on sustainability, I get that, and that's amazing. But I'm just curious the flip side of like what numbers, is it margin? Is it not margin? Like what numbers are you most preoccupied with?
I mean, I do meet with our VP of Finance on a weekly basis, and I mean, the starting thing is cash flow. I mean, this sounds, I used to kind of give my mother a hard time. So I went on to get my MBA, so numbers are a little more easily, I can do a lot of things. But my mother when I used to have meetings with her about money, she's like, well, do we have enough money in our account to pay everyone? And that's not what we're talking about. And she's like, well, why are you complicating it? What else is there to talk about? So in the purest form, I was raised like, if there's enough money, then don't overcomplicate things. So I'm not suggesting that, there are metrics and things, of course, to look at, but we do look at what's the rate, what's the margin, but it's not like a goal to aspire to what is it. It goes back to me, it's a very caregiver-driven industry and business for us. and what is the market demand, and what are we doing to exceed that so we never have a worker shortage. I never, ever, ever want to be in a situation where a client says, I need care, and I say, I'm out of caregivers. And they say, well, isn't that your business? And I say, yes. And I always draw the Starbucks analogy. Imagine going to Starbucks, hey, I want coffee. Oh, we're out of coffee. Starbucks, like you're a home care company. So how in the hell are you out of caregivers? So anyhow, I reject this worker shortage premise or this notion across the country that people are challenged with. I think there's things they could do internally and to right that ship and not have to be in the position that they're in. Mm-hmm. And you'd mentioned earlier, sorry, I'm going to answer your other question. You mentioned we also, part of the reason why we have such low caregiver turnover, so the industry average is about 4 out of 5 caregivers aren't going to be with a private duty home care company in a year. Our average is 15% turnover. So 85% of our caregivers are still going to be with us a year later on average. And so why? Well, one, we pay them more. And then on top of their base wage being higher, they also get, we embrace overtime. So instead of them having to get a second job, if they want to work 60 hours a week, then 20 of those hours on the agent, and so their average hourly wage is substantially higher than what I just mentioned. So it's really, it prevents them from having to get a second job, because most people have a hard time living on less than 40 hours a week of care or and only earning $18 to $20 an hour. So we have great retention on the caregiver side by allowing them to work more than 40 hours a week.
I want to ask us a few specific questions on this. Take kind of an average caregiver on the home care side. What's the average amount of hours that most of your employees are working? Is it that 40? Is it more than 40? What's kind of the average?
No, there's not. I mean, I think what's the average length of time a client gets care is probably the question, because I think it depends. Some caregivers prefer they have a full-time job at the hospital and they want to pick up weekend availability, or some work 3 to 11 at the nursing home. They can work 10 to 2 Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So it depends on what the caregiver, again, what do they want and what does the caregiver need? What does the client need and what does the caregiver want to work? And we again have a way to make sure that we have a pretty good ratio of caregivers available per client that has their different needs. So it's not how much the average caregiver work. Those that work with us that don't work elsewhere definitely want at least 40 hours a week on average. Most of them probably work 60 hours. It's usually Monday through Friday. There's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. is a very common thing. And some will work 12 out of 14 days, and they want to work weekends. And oh, by the way, we pay them even more when they work on weekends. And all this is not charging the client any more money. They have a flat rate. So my margins keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Yeah. And you make me, to answer your question, how do I have any money left? No, there's still, we do it on scale because we're the size that we are, servicing the number of clients that we do.
Do you have an hour minimum for clients, or you don't?
In certain CCRCs or senior communities, we'll have no minimum. And then in private homes, we do have a 4-hour minimum. Like if someone's living in their house, it's a 4-hour. Not that they could have it 1 day a week if they want. So we don't have a number of days a week minimum, but we do have a 4-hour shift, consecutive hour shift minimum.
Okay. I was curious because this is always the Rubik's Cube of hours that the client needs, and then filling that 40-hour schedule for the caregivers. Like, this is the headache and just like the problem that we're constantly trying to solve. So I was just curious if you have minimums and what that looks like, because oftentimes that sets up the kind of 40-hour work week for the caregivers. You mentioned not being afraid of overtime and paying a lot of overtime. It sounds like you even told me that you have some home care aides making 6 figures. I don't think I had ever heard that, honestly, in my time in home care. How is that even possible? We're talking these caregivers, these aides are working a lot of hours and getting a lot of overtime.
Some clients, whether it's live-in or working 12-hour shifts, working either 5 or 7 days a week, and the family absolutely loves that caregiver, and the caregiver wants to stay, and we're like, this is 7 days a week, 12-hour shifts. And they're like, I know. And you have no idea how many lives you're impacting, not just mine here, but the number of families I'm feeding back in my home country. And they are willing and able and happy to work 84 hours a week. I mean, they know the particular client isn't going to live forever. So they're just happy as a caregiver often to have that client in that situation. And then the client or the family and the adult children love that caregiver. I mean, I know my margins get much smaller, but hey, the client's happy and the caregiver's happy. And it tends to have the case go longer than it may otherwise.
Typically, a big part to retaining caregivers for such a long time and having such low turnover rates, pay is huge and you're paying well. What about benefits? What benefits are you offering and what benefits are they taking advantage of that mean the most to them?
Yeah, we spend like 7 figures in benefits for the caregiver. So it's very substantial. Health insurance, we give real health insurance, just like my office staff. We give dental insurance, we pay for. So we pay a lot towards the amount of health, the amount of dental. 90% of the caregivers are enrolled in our 401k. We have an ongoing session of, again, this is the agency caregivers. I want to make sure I'm really clear. So if any lawyers are out there are like, wait a minute. So the half of the business that I've been gearing most of this conversation towards that side of the business. Anyhow, 401k, 90% participation rate. We have 401k advisors that reach out to the care. We have a monthly, we call it meet and greets, and hundreds of caregivers will hop on for that half hour to an hour and just whatever and then we have experts, whether it's 401k or financial planning or just life, like living life. And again, trying to just do our part to really take great care of them.
And it sounds like a lot of these caregivers are taking advantage of these benefits. Sometimes that's the taboo of like you're offering them, but they're not interested or they're not tailored to them.
I mean, it's really an education. I mean, I'm always conflicted because I always feel like, why aren't a higher percentage taking advantage of it? But then it doesn't cost me more money, me personally, to have them not do it. So it's what we do, a 401k match. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention we have life insurance that we pay for the caregivers. So I feel like I'm missing things. Oh, the other big one is we give hundreds of thousands, kind of in the carrot, with a carrot, not with a stick. And so philosophically, this kind of ties in both caregiver and the service obsession, but we have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of money given to the caregivers for getting positive feedback from the families, from the clients. And so we have we're looking for positive feedback, and then the caregivers know we're looking for positive feedback. They even ask us if the daughter called and said, how's everything going? And they know when they're doing a good job, and they know that they're going to get a gift card or a gift certificate or they know they're going to get rewarded for being who they are.
That's awesome. I was going to ask, how do you execute that? Is it mostly just gift cards? Or is gas cards, or what are the things that they appreciate the most?
I mean, we've had these outsourced third-party you can accumulate points, and you go onto the portal, and you can pick and choose all of the above. Okay. Some are gift cards, some are gifts, some are toys, like whatever it may be. They have a lot of different options they can pick from. And it depends on how many rewards they get and how much they want to save up and use it for a later time.
Yeah, it's all automated these days, these rewards and recognition platforms, which is really nice. But like you said, you're rewarding them based off client reviews, client feedback, positive client feedback, and then they get rewarded with these.
And sometimes our coordinators will put in you were heroic at the last minute, and I know, they begged them and they went and they did an extraordinary job, and they want to reward them beyond their base, whatever their pay was. They want to just say, look, atta boy, atta girl, great job, thank you so much, you're awesome, I owe you one. Because that's the reality of what happens in the coordinating world with the caregivers. And we just give them the tools to be that much more successful.
Absolutely. The last thing I just want to mention here on the caregiver sustainability piece is you all started a foundation. You've got money in the bank to invest back into these caregivers. And so you created this foundation to help pay for CNA licenses, and also clients that can't afford care, you actually help kind of offset some of those costs. Can you speak to just the philosophy of starting that foundation and then share any sort of like outcomes?
Yeah, again, it's the same premise. We started this, tell me about your mother. So it's the least amount of cost to consumers and most amount of, so the caregiver's making as much. So we are not a 501c3, so we don't actually deliver the service. So we give the money to companies that service a lower income population, and then we also give monies to schools that give the scholarship money to caregivers that can't afford they want to get their CNA license, but they can't afford it.
And then what about on the client side? You come across people that can't afford care and you pay for a portion of it?
Well, no. Again, we're not allowed. There's laws and limitations because we're a for-profit company that we have to recommend that they go to. There's a few different companies that service that population, and then we give our monies into the foundation. Like, it's the corporate profits, a percentage of that goes into the foundation, and the foundation gives it to those third-party companies.
That's right.
And then they're the ones that, and then we'll refer those families that call to those organizations.
I think this is amazing. And this has been, it's called a foundation, but this has been foundational since the premise of this business 50, almost 60 years ago, is just giving back to the community, giving caregivers opportunities, helping clients pay for care. Like, I think this is just so neat. And I wish we could see more of this in the industry. And home care margins are tight. Not every business has lots of money laying around to be able to do this, but I think this is at the root of what we do, and this is reflective of you as a business, is giving your excess money back to the two populations that you serve to create more long-term opportunities.
But keep in mind, and I don't know if we have time to talk about it, we're not backed by private equity. There's just nothing that forces me to have to do X in X time frame with the fear that I'm going to lose my job in 5 or 7 years. Like, this is what feels like the right thing to do, and therefore I do it. There's no other pressures other than this just feels right.
That's a good segue into this last differentiator, which is that you are still family owned and operated 100%. I would imagine that you have been approached over the years. What is at the root of saying no? Why do you say no? Why do you keep it family owned and operated?
There's several reasons, and yes, I get approached at least twice a day. I'm not exaggerating. Between phone calls and gifts that show up in my, oh, I got another gift, like just to have 5 minutes of your time. Like, so I get approached all the time. And I keep saying, guys, there's no number. I'm not interested in selling. This is very fulfilling for me personally. The fire still burns strong. I do have children, and they're getting older, and it's possible that, I'd like to provide at least the opportunity for the legacy to continue, because I know what it's like statistically from one generation to the next to stay in business. There's a percentage of time it doesn't happen, and then to go to another generation. And so, pull in the advisors about how to effectively transition from one generation to the next. So I just want to keep the legacy going. I don't believe that there's very few companies that share this similar kind of culture and deliver the service in a way that families are truly grateful, like just emphatically grateful that we exist. We get, again, one of the questions on our survey is have you ever had a different home care agency before? And a third of them have. And it's like, wow, a third have gone elsewhere and now they're with us. So the bar, and then they're just sort of like amazed at the experience that they get from us, and they tell us time in and time out. Meanwhile, we have 97 or 98% of our clients that would recommend us. So I guess 2 or 3% wouldn't go to us in the future, but that's certainly 33%.
So back to the question of turning down. No, you're good. Back to the question of turning these people away. The biggest driver is just legacy and impact, but also confidence in what you can deliver, and knowing or assuming that if an outside influence came in, you wouldn't be able to deliver at that same quality. Are there other factors, or what else kind of goes through your mind in this?
For me personally, I have shared with some that I would love. Some people have their goal of, if I can get to my company to be 5 million in revenue, I'll feel like I will have arrived. Or if I can get to 10 million, or I can get to 3,000 hours or 5,000, however they measure their important KPI. So one of mine is when I get the company to be 100 million in revenue, I can finally pat myself on the back and say, Neal, good job. So it's just, I don't know why it's such an easy round number, and I'm 2/3 of the way there. And so, and things are picking up steam. So who knows how many years it'll be, but so that's just, I don't know. It's just my thing.
No, that's great. I like just the kind of the raw transparency of like how you think about this because every CEO thinks about this differently. I do want to circle back to kind of an interesting concept that ties into this, which is you have worn a lot of different hats and your role has grown and changed over the last 30 years. And something you shared with me is you were really strong in growing the company from about 5 million to 40 million, and then you yourself felt like you got in the way and you hit kind of a plateau at that 40 million, but now today you're at around 65, and so you have like identified your own strengths and weaknesses. Can you talk about what went through your mind and how you got out of your own way at that kind of $40 million mark? Because a lot of owners have this moment where they are in the way, and it can happen at any revenue size, but for
Yeah,
you that's what it
I
looked like.
think you're a more effective leader if you're not constantly working. And so I was getting in that from 5 to 40 million, the hours are starting to pick up, and then sneaking downstairs as the family's going to sleep and working more and more and more hours to try to get the business to grow. And finally I was like, I'm not scalable. I'm one person. And quite frankly, so it took some looking in the mirror and recognizing that there's got to be talent out there that's capable of getting past where we were sort of stuck. And so today our president, Jeff, has tremendous skills and has sort of a scalability mindset and has really created an infrastructure in a way that has been very effective for us to get out of the issues I was unknowingly. I didn't know how to fix them. I knew I was causing them. I didn't know how to fix them. And I would read books and I'd talk to advisors and get a coach, and I'm like, and I realized, like, the Peter principle, you get to your level of competence or incompetence. So anyway, and then in comes somebody else has a different way of looking at things and just kind of riding that coattail. So it's been fun to see us get past that 40 million mark.
Okay, that's interesting that you mentioned that because I was going to say, what did you do? Did you read? Did you hire a mentor, an advisor? Sounds like you tried those things. They didn't necessarily work. What really worked and changed the game was hiring some outside influence that came in that you were compatible with, but you had very different like philosophies and strengths, and you probably just like pushed each other.
Yes, very much so. And it's humbling because I'm actually a pretty competitive person, so it's like, can someone really do this better than me? Like, how is that possible? And I got grit and determination, and I'll do whatever it takes, and on and on and on. But at some point, you just, so it was very frustrating, and it's been very enlightening and very empowering and very exciting to, yes, happen to have found a partner that just, we're philosophically aligned, share these very same principles. I mean, almost as if we were twins. And even though, the brother from another mother, haha. But anyhow, so philosophically we're quite aligned, but just how to go about achieving it and the levers to pull and the timing and the when and the how and the infrastructure needed, just all the things that that he's brought to the company it's been extraordinary.
Yeah, that was really
And I've
well
learned
said.
I personally have learned a lot along the way.
Yeah, that was really well said. Philosophically aligned, but not necessarily like operationally aligned. And something we failed to mention earlier was that when we were talking about margins, is you burned through CFOs that couldn't philosophically get behind the charging the least amount of possible and paying the most amount of possible. Like you lost people that could not philosophically wrap their minds around that. But it sounds like you and Jeff like can align on the mission and the vision and being impact driven, and that's enough.
And my CFO is not Jeff, her name is Kira, and she's quite aligned in that regard and is finds it to be, I've been told, an anomaly that someone is so determined to do so much for others. So we're aligned. We're also aligned. In fact, my whole executive, they've been with me for so long now that they've all grown up and they've been promoted from within. And so a lot of our executives, we just, so long as, the only issue is if those become increasingly resistant to change, because you cannot run the business the same way at 40, at 60 million, and 60 and 80 million, and 80. Like you have to do things differently. Mm-hmm. And it's the only challenge at times has been those that have been in denial that they're being resistant.
Which is more relevant than ever in home care. I think every business could draw parallels to what you just said, but especially in home care, just everything looks different at different shapes and size and different like milestones. And so you really have to be agile and nimble and open to change as you scale. I have one last question for you, Neal, and I'm putting you on the spot with this one so you can take a minute to think about it. You talk about scaling to maybe $100 million. That's no easy feat, going from where you are to where you want to get to. What are some of the core components that you can predict will be a part of that growth? Like, what, if you don't know what you don't know, but what are some of the things that you think you will need to explore or change to scale to that size?
I just think we'll gradually get there, just like we've gradually gotten to where we are. I mean, our company grows on average about 8% a year, and we just grow. And so it's tweaking so many things internally. Sometimes there's big, massive, substantive, seismic changes that happen every X number of years, but usually it's tweak, 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 and then you just kind of growing a little bit more than what you were, and then you have to go through a seismic change every 5 to 7 years, and then you tweak, 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 and then you grow. So, I mean, we'll just gradually make it happen.
So it's mostly demand driven. Like there's just the opportunities there and the demand will.
Well, if we've never had a worker shortage, and I don't envision we will, and the baby boomers haven't hit 85 yet, I just think the opportunity it's huge. It's huge.
Can I ask you to predict one of the maybe seismic changes that you could foresee? Technology overhauling like an internal team, like if you could even kind of predict one of those seismic changes in the next maybe 10 years, what do you think it could be?
I would love to say, and this is probably controversial, but I would love to offer the option of having robots do home care. And I'm not saying the entire fleet of caregivers would be robots, but I do think there are some clients and families out there that would prefer to not to feel like they have to quote unquote entertain the caregiver, and knowing that it's not a human, but they get their needs met. That actually, I know it flies in the face of conventional wisdom, and some people might find this very controversial, but again, just a percentage of if technology really grows to the point where robots can do ADLs, I would be fully on board and look forward to being on the early side of experimenting with that.
I like the hot takes, the controversy here. Neal is pro robot. Like you said, there's so much that we don't know. There's so much in development right now, but it sounds like there are families and clients that are open to it, that would benefit from something like that. And so just more exploration on that technology side.
Yes. I mean, I could say more if you want, but yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's just interesting, to be honest. Like you said, it's controversial. I think most people would say that.
But there are, I guess I said this, I want to double down on it. There are a percentage of older adults that really don't, sometimes people are like, what are they going to do all day? I don't need a caregiver. What are they going to do? Like, and the adult child's like, just the insurance, the mental insurance policy of knowing there's a caregiver with mom is the peace of mind. And that knowing that they also don't have to worry about what the caregiver is thinking and feeling actually is a factor into why people may be resistant to getting a caregiver in the first place. But if they knew it was a robot and the robot was been tested and they weren't the first client, then they'd be open to it. I just think there's a segment of the population that would prefer it.
Are you? This is after
It's
show.
not
Here
what
we
I
go.
want. It's what do the clients want. Go ahead.
Are you exploring any smart home automation technology currently? Offering anything?
No, I'm all about outsourcing to find the best that's out there that offers that. I'm not one to let me also have a side hustle or side business going to offer something. I think there's companies that spend hundreds, millions of dollars of their technology, and I would wrap it around what we do, but I wouldn't want to start it from scratch.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. Like, are you packaging any other software or technology into your services?
I have sampled and I've been underwhelmed, consistently underwhelmed. The technology of this industry is by far the most frustrating part for me of the home care. The basics of having a great caregiver go to the home, I'm not saying it's easy, but that's controllable. It's relying on others to help wrap around what we do and do it consistently and with a wow mentality has not been consistently reliable. And I've had to go through a lot of different business partners to have work for periods of time and then have to move on.
Well, it's people like you that push us. We've come a long way in the last 10 years, but we do have a long way to go the next
And
10
we'll be
years when it comes to
incredibly
technology.
unrelenting in doing so. I will always be relentless in this pursuit.
Again, I think we need people like you to push us to be the best that we can be in home care. We've got an uphill battle to climb yet, but we're inching closer. Neal, this has been awesome. I know I've thrown a lot your way, and sometimes episodes are focused on one topic. This was kind of 3 in 1. I think you really held your own and did a great job. We were talking before this call that you've sat on a lot of boards. A lot of people know you, but I just love hearing this story and hear you dial through some of these core areas of your business. So thank you for joining me in the lab, and thank you for being prepared for the conversation today.
It was an honor to be invited, and thank you